Welcome to UNCAGED, a show that celebrates thought leadership from today's top business leaders. The program provides a voice to amazing executives from around the globe who are shaping the world of business today and mapping the path to the commerce of tomorrow. Today, we're speaking with Paul Sullivan. Hey, Paul, how are you?
Great, Ben. Thanks for having me on.
It's great to have you on the show, Paul. Paul is the founder of the company of DADS, which is a media company and community platform aimed at lead dads, those men who are the go-to parents, whether they work full-time, part-time, or devote all their time to their families. And so we'll be talking a lot about dads, the changing role of dads and families, and really kind of restructuring kind of the community around all of those things. And so, Paul, it's exciting to have you on the show. But before we get into the company of dads, tell me a little bit about you and your career.
Well, I am a dad. You can't be the founder of the company of dads without being a dad. I've got three girls, 5, 10, and 13. But I was a journalist for 25 years, and I succeeded in fulfilling my dream, my childhood dream of writing for the New York Times. But for most of my years at the Times, which is the majority of my career, I was what I call a lead dad. People knew me as a New York Times columnist. They knew me as an author of a couple books. I did all kinds of really interesting, fun things. Important things as a journalist. But when it came to being the go-to parent, that was me. My wife runs her own asset management firm. When she went out on her own, when our kids were 4 and 1, she said, what are we going to do? What are we going to do with the kids? And I put my hand up and said, I'll be the lead dad. And she said, well, what is that? And I said, well, I don't really know, but it's a lot better than if I panicked, isn't it? But what enabled me to do that is I had this incredibly rigid schedule. So I could sort of plan all of my work around being the go-to parent. And it was wonderful. It was great. And then, like many things in people's lives, fast forward to the pandemic, we're all inside. We're all trying to figure things out. I'm in the office that you can see me in now. My wife is across, the third floor of our house and hers. And in between us were our daughters trying to do remote learning. And I thought, there must be some sort of community for guys like me, because I was feeling lonely. I was feeling like the nature of work was changing. I obviously wasn't taking the train into New York City to go in the New York Times. I wasn't having lunches with my sources. I was, just alone, like everybody else was. And, lo and behold, there was nothing. There was nothing for, lead dads who are really working dads for the most part, who are super involved. There's tons of stuff on the parenting spectrum, but everything that says parenting is really geared toward moms. And all the things for fathers were super important, but they weren't what I wanted to be part of. And by that, I mean they were for dads who were depressed, dads who were divorced, dads who had a drinking problem. Glad that they existed, but that wasn't what I wanted to do. And so I sort of noodled around, and I sort of really leaned into being what I was, which is a journalist. And I realized through some research that there are about 20 to 25 million men in America who are lead dads, or who would qualify as lead dads, potential lead dads. And to put that in context, there are about 75 million fathers in the United States and about 125 million men. So sizable number. But then, as any journalist, you want to get stories. So I thought, I can't really reach out to men, because at that point I was a lead dad for a dozen years, and I would never lead with Paul Sullivan, lead dad. I would lead with Paul Sullivan, New York Times columnist. So I figured that other men would sort of, lie a bit as I did. So I went to senior female executives, and they had 3 criteria. They had to be senior female executives, so they had some success in their career. They had to be married, so they had to not hate their husband. So they had to figure out how that worked. And they had to have children. So they had to have understood the juggle. And to a T, when I described what a lead dad was, every single one of them said, yes, I either have that in my life, or that's what, my husband aspires to do. And it was this one conversation with this woman, senior marketing person, who said, Paul, this is a great idea, but I know what you're going to do. And I said, what am I going to do? So you're going to write a book. And I said, okay, that was a thought. He says, whatever you do, don't write a book. And I said, my first 2 books are pretty good. Like, why wouldn't I write a book? Because it's not a book. Like, this, we've talked about this. The future of work is changing. We've had this cataclysmic disruption because of COVID. People are going to work differently. This is a media company and a community platform, and you need to start it now. And that's how we launched the company DADS. I left the Times in 21 and launched the company DADS in February of 22.
That's a wonderful story. Paul, I don't think that one excludes the other. I definitely hope you write a book about it, but tell me more about the community today and how it's functioning and really the areas of focus.
Sure. We have sort of three areas of focus. So we're a media company, and that means right now we have two podcasts each week. We have a newsletter that goes out to our community that has all kinds of different features about, being a lead dad, being a working father, partnering with working moms. We also have various features contributed by other lead dads out there, by some experts in parenting and work, and we have a very popular feature called the Lead Dad of the Week, in which we highlight all kinds of different men around the country. The second part is community. Community is essential to this. The first year it was almost entirely online as we got started, and this year it's online, and we already have sort of 3 in-person events planned for different cities along the East Coast. And then the last part, the third part, is workplace development, because unlike my 25 years as a journalist, I'm not coming at this in a dispassionate way. I'm not coming at this in an objective way. I know that there's a need for companies to treat their employees differently, and the company of dads wants to be part of it. And one of the things we say is, look, we are focused on lead dads, but if you create a company culture where men can feel that they are full parents at work, not what I would call event dads. Event dads, any company has an event dad. You leave because your child has a sporting event. You leave because your child has a graduation from a grade. But full on parents, that's good for that worker. That's good for that man and for his soul. But it's also great for working moms, because now it reduces some of the stigma on them that they're always going to be the ones who have to be the full parents, who have to leave when something comes up. And 2 and 3, it ultimately helps the company, and particularly those emerging leaders who are closer to those working moms and dads, because it shows them that the company is evolving, that 2023 we're working so much differently than we did in 2019. It's not just a new a slight tweaking, it's a total reimagination, and that's where the company of dads comes in to help lead that dialogue.
Yeah, it's such an interesting area, and certainly congratulations, Paul, for building it. I makes me think about kind of an interesting question, which is when we think about all of these community organizations, things like the Parent Teachers Association, all of the things associated with our children, those have actually generally been run by women, I'd say, for the last 30, 40, maybe forever, really. How is this changing now? Are we seeing men play roles there, or how is that evolving?
You're talking to a 4-time class parent here, Bant, and I don't want to brag too much, but I've done it.
Congratulations. You have a four-term title there.
4-term, it's look, it changes, iterative change comes slowly. There are other organizations that are really focused on the schools. I'm in the schools because I have three daughters. My focus is on the corporate landscape, but look, it is really tough, and it is not just tough for lead dads, working dads out there. It's also tough for working moms to become involved in the schools, because so many things that are happening during the hours when people are historically in an office. Now, the good part of this is, for white collar workers, COVID has changed the way we work, and so many of us are working 2, 3 or more days at home, so it allows us to do that. But I think one of my daughters goes to a very progressive middle and high school, where for all the important events, they have them twice. So they have them at 9 in the morning, and they have them again at 6 at night. And so from an institutional point of view, that's something that any school can do, or at the very least vary them. 1 month the event is at 9 a.m. The next month the event is at 6 p.m. And that's the only way to get parents fully involved in their kids' school education.
Yeah, that's such a great point. As someone who perhaps failed as a lead dad at times, it was always those expectations that I could somehow be at a 9:45 meeting or a 10:45 a.m. meeting when I was also working, was always kind of really frustrating, because it caused obviously tension at home as well, because anyone who has a spouse, they want you to be actively involved in major decisions and major discussions. But
look, things have changed. Like, there just needs a little bit more creativity, because I can't imagine, like, the last time I had a phone call on the phone on my desk, I don't remember the last time I used this phone for anything. Everything is Zoom. And so every school can start using, the simple technology that we've all become accustomed to involve, all parents. Because when I present the idea of lead dads to men whose children are much older, 20s and beyond, and perhaps they weren't lead dads, everyone to a T says, boy, I wish I could have done that. Nobody ever
Yeah.
turns to me and says, you know what? That's a good idea to be, the go-to parent. But really, I wish I'd spent more time on PowerPoints and commuting. Nobody has ever said that.
No, absolutely not. And it's certainly an amazing, amazing idea, and an idea that you launched during the pandemic. And I think that's always interesting to hear about these ideas that really maybe were bubbling in your mind and perhaps had a life of some sort, but then they gelled and really took off during the pandemic. Tell me more about the pathway of the Company of Dads from when you started it in 2021 to today.
Look, I've been very fortunate and I benefited from, really good timing. It's a great idea, but it was a great idea in 2019 and it wouldn't have worked. It would have failed in 2019. And it's a great idea now because of the timing. People had, white collar workers, again, had 2 years when they were working from home. They got hours and hours and hours of their life back every day. They were
Mhm.
banking, 10, 15 hours a week of hours just
Yeah.
from, yeah. And they showed that they could be so, productive after all. And after all that. And so the moment was perfect. I got very fortunate in that I had a, great relationship with my editors at the time. So they asked me to write a final story in October, which essentially said, what was it like to be a columnist and what are you doing next? And,
Yeah.
how often have you ever, left a job and they said, hey, Ben, on your way out, could you just email everybody and let them know where to find you at? That doesn't happen. And the response was from the three groups that I hope would respond. And that was, men who were lead dads or who quickly identified as lead dads, working moms and senior HR executives who are in a position to, help bring about change. And since then, we launched it, we went live in February 22, and it's just built upon itself. We've always had good guests on the podcast, but now we have a lot more, inbound interest. The quality of guests is really going up. Just in the past month, we had, Congressman Jimmy Gomez, who just launched their Congressional Dads Caucus. Congressman Gomez was on our podcast, but we also had Bill Masters, who wrote some of the funniest Seinfeld episodes of all time. His wife
Yeah.
is Gail Berman, who created Wednesday and the Elvis movie. And so it's just building on itself. But our focus is on lead dads and to make men feel more comfortable being parents, but we're 100% allies of working moms. And so we got a huge boost early on, and we continue to get a huge boost from very, very many, working moms organizations who see the value of this, to see the value of making this something to be proud of, to be proud to be a lead dad and not shameful that you're somehow not the model worker because you should just be at the office working as hard as you can.
Yeah, it's such an interesting one. You're absolutely right. The pandemic offered this moment where people could kind of reflect, or were forced to reflect, how they were going to work, how they were going to interact with their home life and their work life. And they were working at home now. And now we find ourselves in kind of that post-pandemic period where we have celebrity CEOs like Jamie Dimon saying, get back to work, get to the office. How do you think this whole thing is going to play out in terms of the restructuring of society?
Look, you were talking off air. Your dad's a historian. History is
Yeah.
going to be on the side of the people who are moving the way of work forward. I interviewed Jamie Dimon 10 plus years ago for my, first book. I had tremendous respect for him as a CEO. Like many
Right.
CEOs, perhaps he stayed a little bit too long, but he has a tremendous opportunity that he's missing. At Davos a couple of weeks ago, he made a comment that working from home may be better for the mothers in our workforce. I mean, give me a break. It's the most sexist thing you can say. That he has 3 daughters like I do. I mean, it's good for anybody in the workforce. It's good for any parent. I mean, he's rebuilding his entire headquarters on Park Avenue in New York City. That could be a model for the future of work. Instead, it's being, built as if it was, 2019. I mean, going forward, again, as someone who's not as well trained as your dad, but have 2 degrees in history, I mean, demographics is destiny.
Yeah.
And people in their 20s and 30s, they're not only demanding that they're going to work differently, as a couple, they're having discussions. We had a guy on
Yeah.
the podcast a couple of weeks ago who went to Yale, went to Stanford, an attorney, works for the assistant district attorney in San Francisco, and he is the lead dad. Huge
Right.
job, lead dad. His wife works for Apple. She has a job in which she's traveling all over the world. They're both super successful, but at this point in their careers, he has a little more control over his time than she does. And so he stepped up Now, is it
Yeah.
easy for him? No, he can't get on the WhatsApp moms group. I mean, but he's trying, but he's doing it. And they had a rational conversation. It wasn't like the consolation prize that you're going to be the go-to parent. It was something that they really thought about and debated. And that's the future. Those 20 and 30 somethings now are going to carry forward. And, people coming into the workforce, they're not going to, aspire to work like we did in 2019.
Yeah, it's something fascinating for me because it's a very hard argument to support, the diamond argument, because any company that lived through the pandemic, at least my business and most of the CEOs that I speak to, actually didn't suffer efficiency issues, didn't suffer productivity issues, found people were happier in many respects because they were able to balance their home life and their work life a little bit more. And so the idea that I would dictate people to go back to a previous structure that is really kind of puzzling. That being said, I think some of the challenges certainly are how you help young people perhaps get trained and socialized in a way that is probably part of the culture. But I think we're seeing interesting ways of how companies are going to figure that out as well.
Look, 5 days a week work from home is just as rigid as and inflexible as 5 days in the office. Some of the savviest companies that I've talked to are saying, designating a number of days, but the savviest ones are saying, you know what, our group is going to make sure we're in the office every Thursday. Every Thursday we'll be in the office, no Zooms, nothing. We're going to collaborate. We're going to work together. And that's essential. But, COVID has shown, where I live outside New York City, guys who are traders, who work for hedge funds, who work for banks, they say, oh, we can never do this. We always have to be in the office. Well, guess what? They kept trading during the pandemic because all those fancy computers could be just shipped via FedEx to their house and they could set up and make a ton of money. But on a different pursuit, one of my daughters, her best friend, both of her parents are not just doctors; they're both oncologists at Memorial Sloan Kettering. So perhaps one of the premier cancer hospitals in the world.
Yeah.
And one of them, they're both oncologists. One of them is doing cutting edge research. They both work from home several days a week. And they do that because they can do their research at home. They can do their office work at home. And then when they go in, they're fully focused on the patients. They're fully focused on their colleagues. So as I say, like, if you're in the business of curing cancer and you can find a way to work flexibly, then I think all the rest of us can do the same.
Exactly. Well said. Well, Paul, here we are at the beginning of 2023, looking forward. What's on the docket for the company of dads?
Look, I wouldn't be on here if I didn't have exciting things to say. We had our first year, we proved the concept, we grew exponentially, and going into this year, the flywheel has kind of kicked in a lot quicker than I have. We've got a lot of inbound interest. We're in a fundraising round right now. All that money is going to be used to hire more staff, to hire, people to sort of, get the word out. But it's, we're adding more podcasts, we're adding more content, and we're adding a lot more in-person events. And we're also taking the work we've been doing for workplaces, sort of live type work. And part of the fundraising round is to turn a lot of that content into modules that a giant company can use and then parcel out to their employees, whether they're in, Singapore, San Francisco, or keep an S word going, Southern Italy, so they can log into it anytime they want. But it's super exciting. But again, it's the perfect time for this because people want to work differently. And guess what? The best companies, they don't want to dictate. The best companies want to partner with their workers, because what's going to happen? The top 25% can go anywhere they want. And so if they don't institute policies for them, they're going to be stuck with the bottom 40% who don't have any options. And no CEO wants that.
Yeah, absolutely. What we've tried to do is something we call a you-led enterprise, which is it's really up to you to dictate how you want to work, whether you want to be at home, whether you want to be in the office. And we've structured our offices so that, people, if they want to live in Nashville or Portland or wherever, they still have access to an office that they can utilize. If they want to be next to one of the hubs, they can do so. But to get the best talent around the world in the US, I just can't imagine leaders dictating to people how they should be doing micro work is going to be effective. Paul, thank you so much for being on UNCAGED Day. If someone wanted to learn more about what the company of dads is working on and perhaps how they can join the community, where's the best place to reach you?
Yeah, the one-stop shop is our website, the companyofdads.com. That's the companyofdads.com. But obviously we can be found on every social media channel out there, but come straight to the companyofdads.com and you can learn everything you want about the Company of Dads.
Excellent. Well, we've been speaking with Paul Sullivan. He's the founder of the Company of Dads, which is a media company and community platform aimed at lead dads, those men who are the go-to parents, whether they work full-time, part-time, or devote all their time to their families. And we've been talking about really the role and the evolving role of dads, and in fact, actually finding a way to bring those people together in a community to work alongside their partners to be effective parents and in a progressive way, and hopefully a way that reflects this new way of working. Paul, thank you so much for being on UNCAGED today, and we look forward to having you back.
Ben, thank you so much for having me on today. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Cheers.